Today I want to talk about an issue that seems to be challenging for a lot of riders, and that is, number one, picking up the canter, and number two, being able to pick up the correct lead. So I want to go over a few things. First, I just want to go over the canter depart aids. So right now I'm headed off so I can do a circle to the left. So the left side, if I were making a circle, that's the side that's closest toward the center of the circle. That's what I call the inside. And this side, the right side, is the outside. So the aids, in order to pick up in this direction, if I were riding on a circle to the left here, I would be asking for left lead canter. So the first thing I would do is I would put weight on my left seat bone. Now when you put weight on your left seat bone, you don't want to lean to the inside. You can practice this in a chair. You can sit up straight and put weight on one seat bone. I have it on my left now, and then weight on your right seat bone. I have weight on my right seat bone now, then to the left. So your upper body shouldn't lean, but your horse will feel more weight on the inside seat bone, and that's going to help with the engagement of his inside hind leg. Now, as far as your legs are concerned, because when I go over aids, I always go over seat first, then legs, then reins, because that's really the order that you should always think about all of your aids for everything that you do with your horse. So my left leg is on the inside because that's the way the horse is bent. Remember, bend is inside and outside is determined by the bend of the horse, not by the walls of the arena. So my inside leg, my left leg in this case, will just be positioned on the girth, just where it normally lies, with my knee and toe in a straight line, and I have a plumb line shoulder, hip, and heel. And when I get ready to give the aids, I'll just close with my inside calf in that position on the girth. Now my outside leg is the one that actually signals the strike off for the canter, because in order for a horse to pick up the correct lead, he has to step first with his outside hind leg. So I want to somehow signal this outside hind leg to take the first step so that I end up with the inside front leg as the leading leg. So the way that I cue the canter as far as my horse stepping first with the outside hind leg is I give what I call a windshield wiper like action. Watch my lower leg. Sometimes people like to call it a spring-loaded action, and what I mean by that is that you put it back and then you immediately bring it forward on the girth again. You don't put it back and wait and wait and wait until your horse finally answers the canter aid, because if you do that, the horse is not listening to your driving aids. He's behind the aids. So it's one spring-loaded action, one windshield wiper-like action of the outside leg, and that's in conjunction with your inner leg squeezing on the girth. So basically, in the language of the horse, your outside leg is saying canter, and your inside leg is saying go forward, your inside leg on the girth, so you're saying go forward into the canter. Now, one of the things you'll see in this session is a little bit later on is that horses pick up whatever lead they're bent and flexed toward. So if I want Moshi to pick up the left lead, I want him looking a little bit to the left, so I can just barely see his left eyelash and left nostril. And the action of the rein that gives me flexion, also called positioning at the pole to the left or to the right, is this action of pretending that you have a key in a door and you want to unlock the door. Unlock the door. So you start with the thumb as the highest point of your hand. You do one little twist of your wrist, keeping your hand forward in the work area, and then you go right back to home position with your thumb as the highest point of the hand. And as you're turning the wrist, you can bring your baby finger a little bit closer to the withers, but don't ever cross over. So right now, Moshi is pretty much in what I call a neutral flexion with his chin right lined up in the middle crease of his chest. If I were to turn my right wrist like I just showed you, I can just barely see his left eye and left nostril. Right eye and right nostril. He's in right flexion. And now I'm going to turn my left wrist and I have to do it 2 times, there we go, and I just see his left eye and left nostril. Since I got my lefts and rights confused, let's do that again. So right flexion from a right turn of the wrist, he's looking to the right, and I turn my left wrist and I can see his left eye and left nostril. Now what you have to remember is that horses are much more flexible in the neck than they are in the pole. So if all you do is ask your horse to look to the left or look to the right in preparation for the canter transition, you might get this. You might get too much bend in the neck. So there has to be a good marriage between your inside and outside aids where you turn your left wrist in this case to ask for left flexion, but you support with your right rein so that you isolate the pole. Just think of your right rein like a side rein. So you see, as with everything we do with the horse, you always have to use all of your aids, except some are active and some are passive, and there are different actions on your seat, your legs, and your reins. So the combination of aids that ask for the canter to part, weight on the inside seat bone, inside leg on the girth, outside leg doing a windshield wiper-like action behind the girth, flexion to the inside, and supporting with the outside rein. I just want to be sure that I said that correctly. Inside leg on the girth, outside leg in a windshield wiper-like action behind the girth. So the first thing that I'd like you to do is just get comfortable positioning your horse for one canter lead or the other, and you can develop some muscle memory that way. You don't actually have to give any aids. So I'm just going to walk off here and just do that for a little while. I'm going to start with positioning for left lead canter, and I'm just going to stay in the walk, and I'm going to turn, I'm going to put my weight on my left seat bone, my left leg on the girth. I'm going to ask Moshi to flex a little bit to the left by turning my left wrist, but I'm going to support with the right rein, and I am going to put my outside leg a little bit back, pretending that I'm giving an aid. So he's in a position for left lead canter now. Now I'm going to switch to right lead canter position. I flex him to the right, my weight is on the right seat bone, my right leg is on the girth, and my left leg is behind the girth. So I'm going to do that again. I'm going to come toward you, positioning for right lead canter, and then part of the way toward you, I'm going to change and position for left lead canter. So right now, as I'm walking away from you, I have flexion to the right, I'm supporting with the right rein, my weight is on the right seat bone, my right leg is on the girth, and my left leg is behind the girth. So I'm positioned to do a right lead canter to part. And now I'm going to switch to left lead positioning. I'm going to position him to the pole, at the pole to the left. My weight is now on my left seat bone, my left leg is on the girth, and my right leg is behind the girth. So that would be a good thing for you to practice, being able to switch which seat bone you have weight on, which way your horse is flexed, which leg is going to come on the girth, and which leg is going to come behind the girth. Then in the actual moment, first you position your horse for the canter, then you have to give the aid. In the actual moment that you give the aid, you close with your inside leg on the girth to say forward, remember. You bring your outside leg behind the girth to signal the outside hind to strike off, which is why I'm carrying the whip in the outside hand right now. Because if Moshi doesn't listen to my outside leg, I want to reinforce or back up that aid with my whip. So for the canter work, I use the whip in the outside hand. You also want to take that inside seat bone that has weight on it, and you want to give it a little push toward your horse's inside ear. So in the moment that you're giving the leg aids, give a push with your inner seat bone toward your horse's inner ear. And the last thing that's very important is, yes, you have a passive supporting outside rein, which we just talked about, so the horse doesn't overbend his neck to the inside, but you want to actually, in the moment that you're asking for the canter, you want to close your outside hand in a fist. And the reason that you want to do that is that your outside leg is signaling the outside hind to step. But you want to stick that outside hind leg on the ground by closing your outside hand in a fist. If you don't close your outside hand in a fist, sometimes what happens is your horse will just run faster in the trot rather than pick up the canter. I'll show you what happens if, while you're giving the canter depart aids, you don't close your outside hand in a fist. So I'm going to get ready to canter, and you see he just goes faster and faster. So I'm going to slow him down. Do that again without closing my outside hand. And he just runs faster. This time I'm going to close my outside hand. And he picks up the canter. Good. So let's talk about another issue after I give Moshi a little break here. So far we've talked about the aids for the canter depart itself and how important it is for you to get in the habit of closing your outside hand in a fist when you ask for the canter depart. And that will become particularly important as you start to do tempi changes. Otherwise, as you progress along your line of flying changes, your horse is going to go faster and flatter and faster and flatter. So you have to get used to giving a half halt on that outside rein as you're cueing the canter. So those are the aids and how you apply them. The next thing that I want you to think about is that most horses are like most people. They're left-handed or right-handed. In other words, they're stronger on one side than the other. And if your horse were soft or weak or hollow to the left, so his body was curved kind of like a reverse letter C, like that, he's going to be more likely to pick up the left lead, and it's going to be harder for him to pick up the right lead, because horses will pick up whatever lead they are bent and flexed toward. Now, flexion, remember, refers to the pole, and that's that little turn of the wrist while you support with the other rein. And bend refers to the curve around your leg. Your horse should be equally bent from nose to tail with his spine overlapping the line of the circle that you're on. So if I wanted to pick up right lead canter now, and Moshi's hollow side was his left side and his stiff side was his right side, and he was coming around the circle like this. Can you see how his body is falling into the right? His neck is a little bit positioned to the left. His body is falling into the right. I'm going to come at you again so you can see that. Even if I gave him the correct aids to canter, because he's a good horse, he knows that I want him to canter from those aids, but his body is not in a position where he can pick up right lead canter. He's positioned for left lead canter because he's bent to the left, even though I'm circling to the right. So he's in a position to pick up left lead canter. He can't pick up right lead canter unless he's bending to the right. So let's have an example of that and see how that goes. We're going to put him in that left bend position and ask him to canter, and you see I get left lead. And he's leaning on my right leg and falling to the inside of the circle, and his neck is to the outside. So you need to be able to do some exercises. Like I said, since all horses have stiff and hollow sides, you need to be able to do exercises that improve your horse's ability to bend to the inside. And a lot of times people in this case say, well, the right side's the bad side. It's the stiff side. He won't bend to the right. But the truth is, the bad side, if you want to think of it that way, are the muscles on the left side of his body, because they're shortened and contracted, and it's harder for him to elongate his body on the outside in order to bend around your inner leg. So as your horse's physical therapist, you want to do some exercises to help him lengthen the muscles on the left side of his body so he can bend and flex better to the right. One of my favorite exercises to do this is to spiral in on a circle from a slightly larger circle to a smaller circle. And spiraling in just means you come in on a single track, sort of like a pinwheel, like those pinwheel lollipops. Then, keeping your inside leg on the girth, I'll come toward you so you can see this a little bit. Keep your inside leg on the girth. You're going to leg yield back out to the larger circle. And you can see how that improves his bend. It helps his bend around my inside leg and allows him to stretch out the left side of his body. So you might do that a couple of times in rising trot even, where you spiral in rising trot, leg yield out with a bend. Do that a couple of times until you really feel your horse bending and curving around your inside leg. And then the trick is, while you're still leg yielding sideways, you want to blend in the aid for the canter depart then. Don't wait until you're back to the large circle. You still want to be bending and stepping a little bit sideways as you push forward with your inner seat bone. Inner leg squeezes on the girth, outer leg windshield wipers behind the girth, and you close your outer hand in a fist. So we're going to try that exercise and see how that goes. Spiral in, and you can even do it in rising, like I said, and leg yield out. Good. And spiral in a little bit, leg yield out. I step down into my outside iron since I can't put my weight on my outside seat bone for the leg yield, and I'm going to try it this time sitting. And blend in the aid for the canter. Good. And trot. Oh. And he's falling on my right leg again. He's going back into his hollow, left, stiff right position. So I leg yield again. And sit and canter. Good. Trot. Oh, keep balls on my right leg. So I leg yield again. And sit while I'm leg yielding and canter. Good boy. Good. Trot. And walk. And a little break. Good boy, Moshi. So now we've talked about the fact that the horse will pick up whatever lead he's bent and flexed toward. And that's always the first thing I try if a horse has a hard time picking up one lead in one direction. I do something that increases the bending, and I give the canter depart aids while I'm doing that extra bending exercise. So I gave those canter depart aids while I was going sideways. That's the first thing I would do. If that doesn't help, you need to have lots of things in your toolbox. So another thing that might occur to you is that your horse is being lazy with his strike-off leg, which is his outside hind leg. So you might want to do an engagement of the outside hind leg exercise in order to put not only his mind into thinking about his outside hind leg, but put him in a position where his outside hind leg is more engaged and therefore in a ready position to pick up the canter. So in order to do that, I'm going to do leg yielding again, but I'm going to do a different leg yielding exercise. What I'm going to do is keep the front end on the original arc of the circle, and I'm going to bring my right leg back and ask his hindquarters to move on a little inside track so that he takes this right hind leg and steps more under the heavy point of his body. And I will do that, and then the thing that you need to be really careful of with this exercise is that when you go to position the horse to canter again, that you do reestablish the bend to the inside. Because remember, he's going to pick up whatever lead he's bent and flexed toward. So first I'm going to do a little leg yielding and ask his hindquarters to come in to engage that right hind leg. Then I'm going to rebend him to the inside just so I know I can do it. Because if he stays a little bit positioned to the right, he's going to pick up the right lead, remember. We talked about that in the beginning. And now I'm going to engage his right hind leg again, make him step underneath himself. In the leg yield, straighten him, cue the canter. Good boy. Good. Uh-oh. Let's try that again. That was very good. Engage right hind leg. Reposition for left lead and canter. Good job. Good boy, Moshe. Good. Good. Okay, so that's one thing you can think about. Another thing that you can think about is that your horse is not thinking forward. He's not in front of the canter to part aid. And if that's the case, and you'll know this is the case, by the way, if you go back to that thing I said originally, where you're cueing the canter and you feel like you have to hold your leg back for a while, and then maybe 3 or 4 strides later your horse finally picks up the canter. It should be immediate if the horse is thinking forward, if he's in front of your canter to part aid. And so if you allow him to react to a delayed reaction like that, or give you a delayed reaction, you're rewarding your horse for, number one, being behind your aids, and then think about it, down the road, if you want to do tempi changes, 4s and 3s and 2s and 1s, you can't be leaving your leg back for so long and have time to switch your legs for the horse to switch on to the other lead. So the first exercise there, the pushing the hindquarters in the leg yield, although it puts his mind into his outside hind, it was more to engage the hind leg physically. Now what we want to do is get him really thinking hot off the aids, like he was bitten by a little mosquito, and that made his outside hind leg take the first step. So let's say, and that's why for the canter work I normally carry the whip in the outside hand, because the whip is a reinforcement of the leg aid. So let's say I'm on a circle to the left and I want to pick up left lead. I give the aid and he just trots off, jigs in the walk, just goes a little faster, but he didn't react to my aid to canter. I have one of 2 choices. I can either give a little bump, bump, bump with my outside leg, or I can give some little tap, tap, taps with the whip to tell him he needs to be more reactive. I'm going to do that now. Tap, 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 tap. Good. That he needs to think about the leg, and then I retest. Good boy. Good boy. Good boy. All right, now I'm going to do that again with my leg instead of the whip, so you can see that it depends on the sensitivity of your horse, whether if he's ignoring your cue to strike off in the canter, whether you're going to give him a little wake-up call with your leg or with the whip, or if he's really lazy, with both your leg and your whip. But we never leave a thinking forward question with a correction. You give the correction and then you immediately retest with the feather light aid. So I'm going to bump, bump, bump with my outside leg and test. Beautiful. Good boy, Moshe. My goal is to be able to give feather light aids like that. Good. Very good. So you see, there are lots of different reasons that the horse can not only not pick up the correct lead, but not pick up the canter at all. First, you need to be sure that you're giving your aids correctly. Then you need to be sure that your horse is bent and flexed in the direction of the lead that you want. Next, You need to be sure, if he is bent and flexed and he's still not cantering, you need to engage the strike-off leg, the outside hind leg. Make it more engaged, more active, more energetic, so that when you do give a feather-light cue, your horse gives you an immediate surge from behind into the canter. So there are lots of different reasons that horses, number one, don't pick up the canter, and number two, pick up the canter but don't always pick up the correct lead, and that, like I said, that's mostly bend. But let's say, one last thing, let's say you manage to pick up the canter very easily, but you go 3-4 strides or maybe halfway around the circle and your horse breaks into the trot. And you think, why won't my horse keep cantering? The first thing you need to think is, are you doing something in your body that's making it hard for the horse to canter? Are you blocking him in some way? Now let's talk about ways that you can block the horse. Remember, just like in the walk, in the canter, the horse telescopes his neck forward and back, forward and back, forward and back. So your elbows, well actually let's think about it from the shoulder. Your upper arm has to be like a pendulum that swings, and you open and close your elbows so that you get the feeling when you pick up the rein that your arms don't belong to you anymore, they belong to the horse. And as he uses his neck forward and back, your arms go with him. And if you think you're a little bit stiff in your arms, one of the best things that you can do to get the feeling is imagine a jockey going down a racetrack. Get into a two-point position and imagine how the jockey gallops. It almost looks like he's pushing the horse's neck forward, forward, forward with each stride, and then sit back down and keep your elbows moving so that you know you're not blocking him from using his head and neck in the canter. Because if you're blocking him from using his head and neck in the canter, he has to break to the trot. Now, another way that people block their horses is that because they perhaps don't have an independent enough seat, they're not balanced well enough, they grip with their legs to stay on. And if you grip with your legs to stay on, I can just feel it right now, just touching my thigh and touching my pelvis, you lock up your pelvis, you lock up your seat. Your seat can no longer scoop along and go with the horse and follow the movement in the canter. And basically, by closing your upper leg like that and stilling your seat, you're giving the actual signal for a down transition. So you need to be sure that your legs are loose, and in fact, if the horse is in front of your leg, you could even take your legs off, and if your seat is moving, he ought to be able to keep cantering on his own. So if you have that persistent problem with the horse picking up the correct lead for you and picking up the canter when you ask, but he doesn't stay in the canter, check your elastic elbows and check that your hip angles are opening and closing like you're sitting on a swing, and each stride you want to push the swing higher and higher. So let's see what happens when I make some of those mistakes with Moshi. Okay, so I'm going to canter with my arms, jockey arms, loose leg. I'm going to take my leg off, and he still goes. I'm not gripping with my legs. Now I'm going to stiffen my elbows and stop following. Watch what happens. I'll wait till I'm on the side of the camera. Follow, follow, stop following, breaks to the trot. Okay, let's do that again. And now I'm going to keep my elbows moving, but I'm going to grip with my legs and stop my seat. And he stops as well. And now I'm going to do the right thing. Relax leg, following arm. Put the whip in the outside hand. And that allows him to keep cantering without me blocking him. Good boy, Mosh. So you can see sometimes it's the horse that needs help, and sometimes you just need to check your position to make sure you're not blocking your horse from continuing to canter. Hi, we're back, and I have more solutions for very common canter problems that people tell me that they have. And the first one has to do with balance. A lot of people tell me they don't have any trouble with the canter to part itself, but then as they're rolling along, literally, in the canter, the horse goes faster and faster, he's more out of balance, he's more on the forehand, and some of the horses even pull and jerk downward with their heads and their necks. And obviously, if that's what they're doing, their center of gravity is more toward the front end, and we need to shift them back. So I'm going to show you, for example, a canter that's a little bit too fast and a little bit out of balance, and then I'm going to show you an exercise that you can do to help adjust your horse's balance. Now, this exercise, there's two key words in the exercise. The exercise is called frequent transitions skipping a gait, and the two key words are frequent and skipping. So in other words, if I want to collect the canter, I want to do something like 5 strides canter, 5 strides walk, 5 strides canter, 5 strides walk. And the key word with the skipping is that I want to try really, really hard not to have any dribbly trot steps in between. Now, I know if your horse is at training or first level, he doesn't have the balance to pull off that transition from canter to walk without a couple of trot steps in there. But simply by approximating the exercise, you'll get the same benefits. And if you have to help your horse, you can think about doing canter to halt or canter even to rein back, so that you use your seat and your legs and your outside rein in a more influential way to really shift the horse back, and then also support that with a visual image. Think about the way a dog lowers his haunches when he sits down. When you come to the walk, even if you're visualizing coming to the halt or coming to the rein back, you're going to support it with that image. You're going to support your aids with that image of your horse lowering his croup so that the forehand comes up. So that's what you want to do. You want to ride your canter and feel how fast, how much the balance is on the front legs, how much the horse is pulling you with his head and neck out of the saddle and pulling you down. Then you want to approximate that frequent transition, skipping a gait, and then go back and just ride your canter and see if you've adjusted the balance at all. Another thing you want to think about with that exercise, this is something for you to learn as far as your sense of feel, because you're going to be doing, like I said, frequent transitions. Focus on that very first strike-off stride, that very first stride into the canter. That's the most collected stride that you'll have. So if you learn where the balance of the horse is and what it feels like through your body on that first canter stride, the depart, and you think about recreating that first stride, every single stride that you are taking in the canter, you'll keep your collection because your body language will be such that it will help the horse stay collected. So first I'm going to do a kind of fast, discombobulated, hind legs pushing out the back door canter, which is not going to feel in good balance to me, but I want you to see that, and then I want you to see how either approximating the frequent transitions canter to walk, skipping a gait, skipping the trot, will help the balance in the canter. And then if I'm able to actually do some canter walk with no dribbly trot steps in between, then I get even more of a benefit. So first I'm going to show you a canter balance that I don't like. So he's kind of fast, discombobulated, hind legs out the back door. Leaning. Okay, I don't like that feeling. His croup is pushing up against my butt every stride. So there were all kinds of imbalances there. Now I'm going to do that exercise. I'm going to strive really hard to get 5 strides canter, 5 strides walk. I might make a mistake and have a dribbly trot step. I might get more than 5 strides, but think about that. If you want 5 strides, you need to ask for the next transition on probably stride 3. So let's see what happens here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and a little bit falling to the forehand, kind of a dribbly trot step. Another dribbly trot step. So I'm going to use more influence of both legs, my back, and my outside rein to try to get rid of those dribbly trot steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Very nice. 1 dribbly trot step there. Good. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Good. 1, 2, 3, 4. Good. Less than 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, good boy. So now let's ride the canter. And look at this canter compared to the one I had earlier. He's not pulling me around the arena. Good boy, Mouse. So you can see by doing the frequent transitions, skipping a gait, even though in the beginning there were some mistakes, there were some dribbly trot steps both on up and down transition, the transitions actually got better. But even if I ended up with those 1 or 2 little trot steps, which will happen with your training or first level horse because they're not collected enough to pull off that transition, even approximating the exercise, then when you ride the canter, you can feel how much more the balance is back on the hind legs as opposed to shifting to the front leg. When I came to that far corner, he was leaning on my inside leg. I could feel his croup, his hips so high that every stride he was slapping me on the butt. This last canter, he felt more like a seesaw, like I was pushing the back of this one end of the seesaw down, and as a result, the other end came up. So that's a fairly common problem that a lot of people run into when they're starting to canter their horses and their horses haven't learned to balance themselves back. So that frequent transition, skipping a gait, is really going to help. Now let's talk about another very, very common problem, and that's crookedness. There's an innate crookedness in the horse. And even if your horse looks pretty straight as far as the way his legs and his spine are lined up, straight meaning straight on lines and bent on curves like a circle or corner, it's, I was going to say human nature, but it's equine nature to canter with the haunches drifting to the inside. So the way that you should do every canter depart and ride every canter so that you teach the horse the mechanics of bending the joints of the inside hind leg. I'm on left lead canter and this is my left hind leg. If I let my horse be crooked, he'd want to open the joints of the left hind leg and crab his hindquarters over to the left, which is going to push him out the right shoulder and onto the forehand. Once again, he's not going to be in very good balance. So our basic straightening exercise for a horse is some form of shoulder in. Now we don't want to do shoulder in the canter because shoulder in the canter can make the canter become 4 beat. But you can do half the angle of a shoulder in, which is shoulder 4, or even 1/100th of a shoulder in, which is a position we call first position, where if I were on the left lead or I was just circling to the left hind leg would step to the inside of the left foreleg, and if I were coming straight at you, you'd see half the width of this left hind hoof to the inside of this left leg. First position, shoulder 4. All of those positions will place his inside hind leg under the heavy point. of his body so that your horse is straight. And if you think about the training scale, straightness is the 5th ingredient in the training scale, and collection is the 6th. And you'll never get to collection, which is what you're trying to do as you go through the levels. It's that systematic progression, that systematic development of that shifting of the hind leg, shifting of the center of gravity back to the hind legs. So you collect your horse, you'll never get there if your horse is crooked. So it's just a good policy, knowing that it's absolutely normal for all horses, although they do it more so in one direction than the other, to go in the canter with their hindquarters a little bit to the inside. So you want to do some form of your shoulder in aids before the depart, through the depart, and in the canter itself, which means your weight's on your inside seat bone. Your inside leg is on the girth, because remember, shoulder in, shoulder fore, all of those things have bend. Your outside leg is a hair behind the girth, with your flexing rein, taking that inside hand, thumb is the highest point of the hand, and then pretending, Moshi, can you just turn your head just a little bit this way? There you go. Pretending that you're unlocking a door to ask for flexion at the pole to the inside, so you just barely see the inside eye of the horse and inside nostril. And then, knowing that horses are more flexible in the neck than the rest of the body, you need to support with the outside rein, like a side rein, so you don't get more bend in the neck. And then once you have your bending aids on, the action of your 2 reins is what moves the shoulder over. So if you can just sort of get a little close-up of this, if I wanted to move the shoulders over to the left as a unit, my 2 hands would come to the left. If I wanted to move his shoulders to the right as a unit, my 2 arms would go to the right. Now notice, as I'm moving his shoulders either to the left or to the right, my hands stay equidistant from my body. I don't bring one hand closer to my body than the other, because you can see what happens. That's going to tip him over onto the inside shoulder. So you want to keep your hands forward in the work area, equidistant from your body, and as a unit, you can think, if you were doing left shoulder fore, an opening left rein, and with the right rein, kind of like a neck rein, you bring it next to the withers. So to the degree that you bring your left hand to the left, you bring your right hand to the left, you bring the 2 arms to the left, but remember, you never cross over the withers with the outside hand, because you want your reins to work independently on each side of your horse's body. So what I'm going to do is show you, first I'll show you a canter where a horse just naturally goes. They'll pick up the canter with their haunches to the inside, and then they'll canter around with the haunches to the inside. And that's normal, and you just need to be aware of that, because when the horse is crooked, his balance is not going to be good. He's going to be pushing out over the opposite shoulder, and in addition to that, he'll be on the forehand because he doesn't have both hind legs underneath him. And I'm just going to exaggerate this a little bit for you. But if I let the horse do this and put his haunches a little bit to the right, he's unloading that right hind leg. And you can see the depart is crooked. And I'm going to let him canter crooked with his haunches to the right. So I need to fix that. And I do it with a little shoulder fore. Good. Notice where his right hind leg is. I want to keep that feeling through the corner. Leading the forehand to the right and keeping my right leg on. Good boy, Mouse. So just be aware, it's very normal for the horse to go with his haunches to the inside in the canter, and it's going to be more exaggerated when the horse is soft side or hollow side. is on the inside. So sometimes when you put the horse in that baby shoulder 4 position, if you're tracking with the hollow side, the soft side, in other words, if the horse's spine was shaped like the reverse letter C, the left side, the shortened side, is the hollow side. The stiff side, the elongated side, the side that's harder to bend, is the right side. So if I try to do, my horse is going to the left, and I try to do shoulder 4 going to the left, I might not have control over his shoulders if I do traditional first position or shoulder 4 aids. So I'm going to modify that to give me control over this area of the horse's body. And what I'm going to do is, rather than flex him to the inside for the canter depart, which is normal, I'm going to flex him just at the pole to the outside by having him look, if I'm going to the left, which is his hollow side, and I'm going to do that in a second, by having him flex to the right through the transition and in the canter itself, I have a greater chance of being able to lead the shoulders in rather than having head and neck in. Oh. So, first position with a little counter flexion. Good. Good. Good boy. And he's a nice shoulder 4. In counter flexion. If I do that, that's what's going to happen, and the shoulders go back to the right. So you can see, depending on which is your stiff side and which is your hollow side, that you have to modify your shoulder 4 aids so that you actually have control over the shoulder region of the horse, because that's how we straighten a horse. We always straighten a horse by bringing the front legs in front of the inside hind. We never try to straighten the horse by bringing our inside leg back and pushing the hindquarters out, because then you're disengaging the hindquarters and the horse is going to fall on the forehand. Okay, so last thing I want to mention. Earlier in this session, way earlier, I talked about the actual aids for the canter depart. And in the beginning, I just want you to concentrate on that. Just get comfortable. Get comfortable positioning your horse for left lead canter and right lead canter, going back and forth from one to the other. Get comfortable with a quick windshield wiper aid of your leg. Get comfortable with closing your outside hand in a fist. You have enough to do in the beginning stages that I wouldn't want to ask you to multitask any more than that. However, once that begins to be normal, natural, second nature, just like if you wanted to move off from the halt to the walk, you wouldn't think about it, you just close your legs. So when you're on autopilot with your canter depart aids, you want to think about doing something called timing the aids. And I'm going to move down toward the mirror here. If you're lucky enough to have a mirror, and if you're not, grab a ground person. What you want to learn to feel is when a hind leg is on the ground. Because the only time that you can really influence a hind leg is when it's on the ground, and specifically just before it pushes off. So, focus on your seat bones and feel when your outside seat bone is either being pushed higher or being pushed forward. Then look in the mirror and coordinate when you see now, 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 when you see that outside hind leg on the ground. Or have a friend just count when they see the outside hind in the ground, and then close your eyes and feel what that feels like through your seat, because you're going to want to coordinate the aids now, 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 canter. Good. So eventually you want to coordinate your aids with that outside hind leg being on the ground. And you can do the same thing in the trot, but don't be in a hurry. First, just learn to feel when the hind legs are on the ground. For me, the feeling is, I get the feeling that my outside seat bone is being pushed forward. So it would be now, 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 canter. Good. So don't worry about that now. But that's something for you to think about down the road as you become more sophisticated with your canter work. So I think that we've covered a lot of the most common problems that people have in the canter, and I've hoped that we've given you some tools to put in your toolbox to help you solve those common problems.